how do we describe the edifice of Islam, the beautiful building of Islam? And unfortunately, we do. When you remember your RE lessons, how was Islam described? The 5 pillars. It's not a great way of selling it. And it sort of takes me back to The Message. I don't know if you've seen The Message. Amazing film, love it. It's, obviously very old. It's not in HD or Ultra HD, 4K, any of that, but it's so moving. And this scene in particular, I don't know if any of you can recall this scene. So this is the scene of when Ja'far bin Abi Talib, the cousin of the Prophet, first cousin, was in charge of the Muslim community, the spokesperson for the Muslim communities that had emigrated to Abyssinia. And the Negus, the king of Abyssinia, a Christian king, was about to throw them out because Amr ibn al-As had come, and he was an old trading friend of the Negus, because essentially Abyssinia is just across the sea. And he said, well, these reprobates, these renegades have come and they've changed our religion, blah, blah. Here's some lovely gifts. Can we take them back, please? And he said, oh yeah, off with them. And then, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib comes forward to save the day. And he presents Islam in the most compelling way until, Negus is in tears. The whole audience is in tears. And in the end, he says, the difference, I think he picks up a straw or something, or draws a line, and says the difference between what we have and what you bring is, this little bit of difference, essentially. Yeah, so what did he say? What did Ja'far bin Abi Talib say? And this is his actual speech. And the Message doesn't tell the correct speech, but it's still nice. But the actual speech is this. And he talks about how, O king, we were a people in a state of ignorance and morality, and then describes the state that the community of Mecca were in at the time. Okay, and then he says, and we carried on like this until God sent us a prophet. Now he uses the word prophet, which is something that a Christian will be able to relate to. And he talks about the lineage of the prophet being one that everybody recognized. And then he talks about not the 5 pillars. He talks about how the prophet called them to worship one God, to abandon the idols, speak the truth, honor promises, be kind to relations, helpful to neighbors, abstain from bloodshed, avoid obscenities, and not to appropriate the orphan's property, nor slander chaste women. And then he talked about prayer and fasting, which are both things that a Christian can relate to. You see how amazing that presentation was, yeah? And we know what happened. The rest, as they say, is history. They stayed. So how do we find the core teachings of Islam, the ones that Ja'far was taught, in that early stage in Mecca, when the whole Qur'an had not been revealed, but the essence of the message was there, and he was able to present it. So what was that? What was that teaching? That kind of complete code of teachings that Ja'far was inspired by. So where do we go for this? Do we ask scholars? We talked about this last time, this whole essentialist question of how do you define Islam? Who defines it? Who has the right to define it? So of course, scholars do define Islam, and they define it in immense detail. The problem is that when you're asking about anything with scholars, there is difference of opinion. And recently I've been doing a series of talks and doing a lot of research on slavery. For the majority of Islam's history, scholars said you cannot ban slavery. They said to ban slavery is haram because the Prophet never banned slavery. Okay, and now we have a situation where Sheikh Ya'qubi, for instance, when he was talking against ISIS, said that the strongest argument against slavery, which ISIS has obviously started practicing again, is that there's a consensus amongst the scholars that slavery is banned, the opposite. You see, so you think, okay, well, look, let's just, we're asking about the basics, the essential of Islam. Let's go to the source. Let's go to the Prophet who taught Islam. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ is Uswatun Hasana. The Quran says that. So we go there. The Prophet taught us lots of things. He taught us that greeting your Muslim brother with a smile, shaking the hand, removing harmful objects from the road, being kind to animals, growing the beard, eating with the right hand, lots of teachings. So, but are these the essential teachings? Where are the essential teachings? Are these the essential teachings? Maybe they are. Well, the trouble you have is that there are a lot of hadith and a lot of teachings. Where's the essence? Where's the core of what you have to do? And the thing that defines Islam, you might say. The Prophet ﷺ's hadith go into the hundreds of thousands. Musnad Ahmad, one collection alone is 30,000 hadith. But we know that when Aisha radiallahu anha was asked about the Prophet, she said, "Kana khuluquhu al-Qur'an," that his character was the Qur'an. So we go to the Qur'an. Now, in the Qur'an, what you find is the answer to our question, right? There are a number of verses in the Qur'an which list the teachings. They say, this is Islam. This is what you need to follow. This is what you need to do. And they're there in clear, very clear terms. A number of teachings. So you can see this little table here, which has these, commandments verses, you might say, or I might say the codes that the verses that describe our spiritual code. And for instance, this is called Ayatul Bir quite commonly, and it's the verse of righteousness, because the verse starts with, "It is not righteousness that you turn your faces towards the east or the west, but righteousness is to believe in God, the last day, the angels, the book, the messengers, to spend of your substance out of love for him, for your kin, for orphans, the needy, the wayfarer, for those who ask, and for the ransom of slaves, to be steadfast in prayer and practice regular charity, to fulfill the contracts which you've made, and to be firm and patient in pain or suffering and adversity, and throughout all periods of panic. Such are the people of truth, the God-fearing." So Allah is saying, this is righteousness, and you do these things, and then you will be the people of truth, and you will be the God-fearing, the muttaqun. Okay, it's literally saying this is it. In Surah Ma'arij, similar teachings, the similar, pretty much the same thing, and it ends with, "Such will be the honored ones," and there's a promise here in gardens of bliss. So not just gardens of bliss, but honored in the gardens of bliss. You don't just make it; you make it with honor. You'll be marked out. You'll be marked out when you're here. Okay. So what we find is that if you go through these verses, they have a list of teachings, and very often they will package the teachings by explaining that either there's something very special about this way, right? So Allah will say, "This is my way leading straight." He will say that this is the most trustworthy handhold. What does that mean? It means hold to these teachings and you will be safe, right? Even if you're confused about anything else, hold to this and you'll be safe. He talks about it being the path to success. He talks about it being bir, piety, the covenant with the children of Israel, the wisdom of Luqman, the steep path, the basis of the Pledge of Allegiance. And then the people who follow it are called the muttaqun, the mu'minun, the ibadur rahman, the servants of the beneficent, ashabul mayman, the companions of the right hand. So you can see, and then the promises are God's forgiveness if you follow these things, that you will inherit Jannatul Firdaus, and you will be in the highest place in heaven, and you will be honored in the gardens of bliss. These are the promises for following these teachings. And you'll see that these are the kinds of teachings that are there. There's teachings relating to faith, relating to worship, lots relating to character and behavior, and then lots of commandments, the do's and don'ts. Okay, bringing it together in a way that's kind of easy to see in an instant, you get this kind of graphic, you might say. And this is literally taking those teachings that are in those verses, not adding anything extra and not taking anything away. This is what you will see in those verses. Okay, and you'll see here that you have a set of teachings relating to belief and worship. You have a set of teachings that are about spirituality, about your relationship with Allah, about the importance of loving Him, feeling grateful towards Him. So these are the key things that Allah is emphasizing, right? This is at the core of, if you want to get to paradise, concentrate on this. Yeah. And these are what you might call the huquq Allah, the rights that God has upon you. Okay. And then you have teachings relating to commandments, like, for instance, adultery, the need to practice charity, honor your parents, not take life, not steal, fulfill your promises, not to exploit people through usury, etc. And then character, okay, about how to be that extra special person, and then service, which we'll talk about shortly. So these teachings, you could say, are the huquq al-ibad. So there's a lot of teachings which are about fulfilling the rights of the creatures of God, right? What's it all about? All these teachings are about doing your duty towards God's creatures. And what you find here with the spiritual code, essentially, is that, hey, it's simple, right? It all fits onto a page. It's beautiful. When you read it, don't you think, wow, yeah, I can relate to these teachings. People might be confused about lots of things with Islam, but if they realize that this is actually what Islam is about, it actually appeals to everybody. It's universal. It's not that that lots of people are going to have issues with it. If you said to people, be a Muslim, they might say, well, I'm not sure I want to be a Muslim. So why don't you want to live, or would you like to live according to the teachings of Islam? They go, no, thanks. I say, well, look, these are the teachings of Islam. They go, okay, well, I haven't got an issue with this. This sounds pretty good. I'd like to see a Muslim who follows this. Okay, and so the question is, well, do Muslims know this? Do non-Muslims know this? It's a shame, isn't it, that we're not able to market our faith in this way. So let's just see how we're doing for time. Okay, all right. Let me move on. What I will say is, if you look at the marketing, so what about the 5 pillars? You can see that actually the 5 pillars are just a small part of this. I know I haven't actually got to the crux of the talk yet, but I really wanted to get this point across, okay? That the 5 pillars are a small part. And normally for people who maybe don't pray, they don't fast, like the Negus can relate to prayer and fasting. He maybe could relate to pilgrimage, possibly. But for most people, these things don't actually mean a lot, right? But that's not, remember, this isn't the entity of Islam's teachings. It's really just the foundation, as the Prophet ﷺ said. Right, you've got to talk about the rest of it. And the Prophet ﷺ never invited people to Islam through the 5 pillars. So there are hadith where the Prophet, in the early days in Mecca, when he was going to people and they said, for instance, there was a chief of a tribe, and he said, okay, so what is it that you're calling us to, oh brother of Quraysh? And the Prophet ﷺ read out this verse, which you've heard in Jummah. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي. That God enjoins justice and doing good, generosity towards your fellow men, forbids shameful deeds and deeds that run counter to reason and envy, and He exhorts you that you might that you might bear this in mind. And he said, well, if this is what you're calling to, these are the most noble morals and the most virtuous deeds. And those who've disbelieved in you and opposed you are deceivers. What they've been saying about you is a load of nonsense. Wow, and other companions say that when the Prophet invited us to Islam, that the things that the Prophet ﷺ said to the companions, one companion, for instance, Tufail ibn Amr, says that I tell you truly, never in all that I had heard before, and I tell you truly, never in all my life had I heard words more excellent nor precepts more just. SubhanAllah. That's what the Prophet was inviting people to, not the 5 pillars. Okay, there's these verses of the Qur'an that he was using. Yeah. And so when he told companions to go to Yemen, where there were lots of Christians, he told them, so he actually, this goes through the 5 pillars essentially, but what he says is that invite them to testify that there's no deity but God and that I'm his messenger. If they accept that, then tell them about prayers. If they accept that, then tell them that there's charity to be taken, etc. You see? Okay, now let's talk about khidmah. Okay, so if you look at these teachings that come straight from the Quran and straight from these core verses, where it comes to service, one of the things that it says that's beautiful, that Allah teaches us, is tawasaw bil marhama, to encourage something called marhama, which is empathy, compassion. It comes from the word raham, which is womb, which relates to the love between mother and child. You know, so it's that feeling in your heart of complete sort of, you know, pity, love, compassion towards people. And there are other teachings as well, which we'll come to shortly. So if you look at Surah Balad, where this is mentioned, so this is one of those sets of verses where all the teachings are laid out, or key teachings are laid out. It talks about the steep path, and it talks about the path being, and this is where Allah is kind of tugging at our heart, essentially, right? He's trying to reach out to your sense of compassion, your sense of mercy. And he says that, you know, what is the steep path? It is the setting free of the slave, the person that's bonded, that's, you know, trapped, essentially, setting them free, or giving food in the day of famine. So you think about the, you know, the desperation of people when they're in, when there's a famine. Yeah. And then he says, or the orphan near of kin. And the reason that Allah mentions near of kin is that, you know, he's saying, well, think about an orphan that's close to you, maybe your brother or sister's child, and they've passed away. You know, it could have been your own child. You know, put yourself in their position. You see them every day. You know, you can imagine their life. You see, and then this amazing description of miskinan dha matraba, a poor, indigent person in misery, lying in the dust. You see, and then Allah says, so those are the people who believe, exhort one another to patience, وَتَوَاسَوْا بِالْمَرْحَمَةِ, and exhort one another to pity and compassion. They will be the companions of the right hand, right? So what Allah is saying here is that you think about these people, think about their suffering, have that in your heart, be the kind of person that has the heart that cares, right? And then you will be amongst the people of the right hand. That's how important love and marhama is. Now, the interesting question is, what is this Muslims? When you think about these Meccan surahs, the majority of the poor people there weren't Muslim. Muslims were just a handful at that time. Okay, this is talking about all humanity, right? The slave, all the slaves you're thinking of, they're not all Muslim. When you're talking about in famine, are you going to choose between the Muslim starving person, that indigent person in the dust? You can say the Muslim indigent person, the non-Muslim indigent person. No, these verses are talking about whoever is poor, whoever is suffering. Your heart goes out to them. When you look at the verses, commandments verses that talk about neighbors, talks about travelers, these won't be Muslims. It's talking about any person of humanity. There's scholars who say that, you know, the famous hadith over here, none of you truly believe until he loves for his brother what he loves for himself. That brother means your brother in humanity. Like Imam Nawawi explained, that's what it means. And if you're not sure, then there's another hadith which is very similar, and it talks about your neighbor doesn't believe until he loves for his neighbor what he loves for himself. Yeah. So this is an important point, and we don't, you know, we often think, actually, you know, that extra love has just got to be with Muslims. Hasn't. It's all of humanity. So this is, you know, in many ways, if I wasn't able to say anything else today, I'd have time for it. The one thing I could say is, look, we are people of marhama. If you have marhama And the other thing that Allah said is tawasaw bil marham, to encourage to other people as well. Tell them about it, remind them, oh, think about this person, think about their suffering, have a heart for them, right? So if nothing else, the fact that we should be the people of empathy, okay, and that you guys are at the forefront of empathy, so often when we're living in our little boxes, you're not aware of people suffering, whereas you guys are out there, you're talking to people with all kinds of problems. You can put yourself in their lives, you can put yourself in their shoes, right? You can actually feel what they're feeling, and you can take the benefit of that, because you see, the teachings of this spiritual code are all about caring, they're all about making a difference. And honestly, we are, I'm also, alhamdulillah, in that position as well, and it's such an honor and privilege. We are so lucky to be in a position where we can serve humanity, right, irrespective of faith. And if we do it with love, with that marhama, with that compassion, then we will get Jannah, inshallah, right? You might say, oh, I'm going to memorize the Quran, or I'm going to learn lots of hadith, and do lots and lots of Islamic courses, etc., etc. But I tell you, if you're training to be a healthcare professional, do your job well, and you will get rewards, because the Quran is talking about that's actually what Allah wants from you, is to be that kind of person that demonstrates their character and loves and cares for people and helps them in their suffering. Look at those teachings, right? So honestly, we're so lucky. If you just did your degrees well and you did your job well, honestly, it's the easiest path to Jannah, the easiest path, undoubtedly. And honestly, what blessing we have in that. And of course, if you are people who are living by that spiritual code that Islam, the Quran teaches us, then inshallah, you'll be giving shahada. People will see it. You will be the popular doctor or dentist or, healthcare professional of whatever discipline. Just some thoughts to think about empathy, and this is really, some beautiful words. I really was touched by these. What Whitman says, that I do not ask the wounded person how he feels. I myself become the wounded person. So think about this. Next time you're on the wards or you're talking to a patient, right? Don't even just ask. Become that person. All right. Then care for them. Yeah, that's marhama. Yeah. Mahatma Gandhi, he said that I call him religious who understands the suffering of others. And it's true. That's what the Quran is saying. He's right. Leslie Jameson, she's got these lovely ideas here that, look, empathy isn't about just sort of looking at someone and feeling for them. It's about inquiring so that you can get into their life, realizing that actually you don't know until you've actually asked the right questions, right? So for instance, and I see this very often as a GP when we're talking about, let's say someone comes in depressed or they're asking for antidepressants, you could just say, okay, let's answer these questions about how depressed you are. I'll grade it. Yes, you're very depressed, antidepressants. Or you could actually say, well, what's going on in your life? I want to know. Yeah. Actually get into the detail, the nitty-gritty of what's actually happening. Why is it that they're in this situation? And then you make a different level of connection with the person, subhanallah. And then actually just talking is healing. There's just having that interest in the person is healing. And one of the important things, and this is a nice quote, Jonathan Franzen said that love is about bottomless empathy, born out of the heart's revelation that another person is every bit as real as you are. Sometimes we have this kind of like sense that we're Muslims and these are non-Muslims or something. There's a kind of divide, but there isn't. At the end of the day, we're all human beings, we're all God's creatures, and we're all dear to Allah. and that's it. You just look at, that's the way you look at every person, right? And they're just as real as you are. Yeah. Safeguarding, I don't know, you might not be talking about safeguarding much yet. This is something that we talk about later, but you know, the idea of freeing the enslaved, actually very often when you become a professional, we're constantly on the lookout for people who are enslaved, because people are enslaved these days. Children are enslaved by the cruelty of some parents. Lots of women are enslaved in domestic violence and abusive relationships. So, you know, that's part of our role as professionals, that we're looking at that. So you might think, oh, free the enslaved, oh, there's no slavery. Actually, there is slavery, but it's just in a different name. Okay, and we're actually people that are looking after, we're guardians of people's safety as well, actually, as healthcare professionals. The tongue, there's a clear instruction, be careful with your tongue, okay? And there are many verses actually that relate to this, and you'll see them in that kind of matrix, which is the spiritual code. But encouraging kindness and compassion is part of the tongue, right? Using the tongue properly. Having humility and knowledge is actually part of the tongue as well. Yeah, because it's about knowing when you don't know things and asking questions, right? So even when it comes to that, to people, empathy, right? That's asking questions, knowing you don't know the person, right? You can't just say, oh, he's coming asking for antidepressants, I know them now, they're a depression patient, you know? You don't know them yet, ask the questions. Enjoining truth, and that's what we're doing in many ways when we educate people, is we're helping them to understand their conditions better as well. Speaking justly, controlling anger, this is all part of our relationship. Forgiving people, speaking softly, and avoiding arguments. These are fundamental teachings relating to how we relate to one another as professionals. Yeah. So if you look at the actual verses, you have verses that say, for instance, and speak kindly to mankind, and speak to them, the needy, a gentle word. Yeah, when people are suffering, give them words of reassurance. Yeah, lower your voice. Beautiful teachings of this is Luqman al-Islam. He says, lower your voice, for the harshest of sounds is the braying of an ass. And the other thing that's really important is this. If you look at this, this is in the verses about Ibadur Rahman, sort of Furqan. He said, it's when the ignorant address them, they say peace. Now the point here is that non-confrontation, okay? That you're trying to get to a point where you're not going to be at odds with the person, okay? And this is quite an important thing, that when you're having a conversation with people, you're trying to be on their side. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. Look at the example of the Prophet ﷺ. There's some things here. I'm just going to, I mean, these notes will come out, you can read them. Okay, the Prophet ﷺ, very importantly, he was softly spoken. Okay, and he would be very gentle in the way that he spoke to people. Okay, and he would give people hope, he would encourage them, he wouldn't frighten them. Be careful about that. You know, if you know something about person's health, you could frighten them, or you could give them hope. Yeah, and that's the nature of the Prophet ﷺ. The other thing that is really interesting about the Prophet ﷺ is that when people started to talk to him, he would turn to them, give them his full attention. And Ali, for instance, describes the Prophet as like, when people talked to him, it felt like they were the most important person to him. Yeah, even when he was in a gathering. And that's the nature of the attention that he gave to people. So this is like when we're consulting, and you know, I think as healthcare professionals, you're all consulting, you're all talking to patients. Start with that idea. Now, you know, this kind of idea of sort of building rapport, it's sometimes called, or in NLP, they use the word lower resistance, which is quite manipulative, I think. But even the word building rapport is sort of manipulative, because it's this idea that, oh, you've got to get something across. Let's just kind of become friendly so that I can get my, you know, doctor-led objectives across. But actually, really, I like the Covey's description that actually seek to understand before you are understood. That's beautiful. Is the idea that you're actually trying to get into their way of seeing things. And then you share information and maybe you mold their understanding a little bit based upon what you understand. Yeah. Right. Few minutes left. Couple of minutes left. So team players. I'm just going to say that with regards to this, what's that really fundamental here is the verses of the Qur'an, the teachings of our spiritual code about humility. So humility and knowledge, okay? And that means that if you have humility and knowledge, let's say you're in a meeting, it means that you start from a position of saying, I don't know, I want to listen. I want to hear what everyone else has to say. Yeah, that's really important. And we see that that's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ as well, okay? And also humility also in your character in saying that, okay, whenever things are done together, they're done together. Yeah, you're a team player and the work is done by people helping each other. It's that idea that, you know, you're not special. And there's a beautiful verse in the Quran which actually talks about, look, don't think you're that special. Yeah, look at this verse. It says, and do not walk upon the earth exultantly, like you're special, right? Indeed, you'll never tear the earth apart and you'll never reach the mountains in height. You know, you're not that special that you're going to become as grand as a mountain, right? Allah is Dhul Jalali wal Ikram. You know, he of Jalal, of majesty and nobility. So, you know, you're just a human being and accept that. So therefore, recognize that everybody else that's around you is also special and give them that honor and dignity. So, you know, try not to use I, use we. Yeah, feel the we and use it as well. And then, of course, lots of things about the way that you relate to people. Don't be too loud, don't be boastful, and don't be angry, control your anger. And also forgive people, because we're all human and we all make mistakes. God, I've made so many mistakes. We all know them. Sometimes you just remember them and they'll be with you for the rest of your life. Okay. And just remember that everybody else is like that as well. Okay. So have that kind of gentle humility with people. Right. Final point is change making. Now, this is really important, so I have to stress this one, okay? And this is something you may not have come across before. I really think so. This is Luqman alayhi salam again. He says, "Oh my son, establish prayer, enjoin what is right, forbid what is wrong, and be patient over what befalls you." Yeah, wa'mur bil ma'rufi wanha 'anil munkar. And there's another verse in the Quran. It's not one of the kind of spiritual code verses. Very important verse in Surah Al Imran, in which Allah says, "Kuntum khayra ummatin." And a lot of people, a lot of Muslims will only see that first bit, where it says, "Kuntum khayra ummatin." You are the best of peoples, and they go, "Oh yeah, we are indeed. We have the religion. We have Deen al-Haq, the right religion." Okay, and all of that. But then it explains, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas," that you have been brought out for the benefit of mankind. You are the best people brought out to benefit mankind. Why? Ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhawna 'anil munkar. You enjoin what is right, you forbid what is wrong, whilst believing in God. So God, your belief in God inspires you to do good, forbid evil. So now let's think about this. Now, most people, I would say, have this idea of a tribal understanding of good and evil. Okay, this idea that maybe good is, I don't know, you know, ensuring you get halal meat wherever, right, prayer rooms or something, and forbidding evil is like forbidding pork or alcohol or something, or it's about clothing. Okay, so how can you be evolved, best people evolve for mankind, when, you know, Allah is saying this is a phenomenal responsibility. You're going to benefit and you're going to help mankind by doing superficial things, relatively, like food and clothing? Surely not. Yeah, and actually, if you look at the words that are used, the ma'ruf and munkar, not khair and shar, which is just bad, evil and good and evil. Specifically, ma'ruf and munkar. Ma'ruf is a special word. So, an amazing scholar from America, Muslim scholar, Professor Sherman Jackson, has written a whole paper on this. Okay, but the notes are there, so I won't be able to read all of this out, but it's really important. What he explains is al-ma'ruf, which comes from arifa, to know, okay, is the commonly known things. It's what everybody knows is good for society, right? So he says that the Prophet never ceased to identify as a member of his society and to seek to enhance and preserve Arabia's common good. He wanted the good for all his society, right? And ma'ruf literally means that which is known by convention to be good and wholesome and sound. All of society knows that this is good for society. That's what ma'ruf is, okay? And similarly, munkar is what's rejected. It means rejected. It means rejected by all of society as being the wrongs in society, the harms, the bads in society, like child abuse, oppression, domestic violence, murder, etc. Okay, so he says that essentially that it served the kind of this idea of ma'ruf served not simply the Muslim good, but the overall Arabian good at the time of the Prophet. Yeah, and similarly for us, what he says is that we have to do the same. Our idea of ma'ruf and munkar, forbidding or to do the good and to prevent the wrong, is about improving society. And he gives examples of this that actually, so the laws of Sharia are very limited. And ma'ruf and munkar is about doing everything else, not just what's clearly stated in the Quran and Sunnah, but everything else to improve society. Okay, and he gives the example that, ma'ruf and munkar is about things like speed limits, licensing medical doctors, immigration policies and zoning regulations, procedures for tenure, promoting food safety standards. So essentially, what he's saying is that improving society is all part of your duty of ma'ruf and munkar. And this is one of those core teachings of the Quran. So essentially, what this means is that, you'll get to a point where when you're going through your degree, you go through these milestones, right? So you do your degree, you learn the trade. As you get good at the trade, you start to find ways of improving the way that the trade is done, right? Improving services. So you'll find that maybe about 7 years after graduating, 10 years after graduating, you get to a point where you're doing everything really well. Then you get to the point of improving services. And that is also a crucial part. You've got to see that as part of your duty as a Muslim. Okay, that's how you earn Jannah. That's how you earn Jannah. So I hope that, we're finished now, alhamdulillah. What I really like you to do is to have a look closely at the spiritual code. Realize this is the Quran. This is the core teachings of the Quran. Nothing added, nothing taken out. And if you can check yourself, maybe even every day you say to yourself, all right, how am I doing against these things? How did I mean, obviously belief and worship, fine. Okay, well, even the worship, the salah, what was my salah like? Because a lot of the verses are about the quality of our salah. Okay, but then character. Ask yourself about each of these things. How did I do today? Okay, how am I going to change myself tomorrow? Not just in your person and family, but also in your university life and in your working life as well, inshallah. You'll see how this will all make you better professionals. The other final point I want to make here is that Allah says, we have indeed honored the son of Adam. Yeah, لَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, that we have honored the son of Adam. And that is because the son of Adam has this instinctive ability to recognize good. Yeah, we've seen that. We have a society here which isn't governed by Islam per se, but people have brought together a good society, okay? And they will recognize all these things. What it also means is that we can recognize the good in other people as well. So don't see us, when you're interacting with people of different faiths, etc. You know, most of you will be in the NHS. Everyone is there to try and improve people's health, to make their lives better, and be inspired by the people around you, irrespective of their faith. Because in many cases, they might be living by our spiritual code better than we are. Yeah. And so be inspired by them, look up to them, you know, and recognize that, you know, honor them for that, inshallah. Okay. I think I've ended there, inshallah. So I'll hand over to Rahma. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Uncle. Thank you. We just have a couple of questions quickly, which we can just do in the last few minutes. The first one is, as a healthcare professional, how do we introduce people to Islam?
Yeah, okay, well, let's just make a fundamental point here, okay, which is that as a professional, you are in a power relationship with your patients, okay, and you will see that one of the teachings here is, I'll point it out to you right here: be kind to those you have authority over. It means that you can't abuse your authority, right? This is a crucial point. So you can't preach to people whilst you have the hat of a healthcare professional. Okay, fundamentally, it's, you know, in some ways you could say it's actually immoral. You can inspire people towards just general teachings, which obviously, you know, will come from the Qur'an Sunnah perhaps, okay, but you can't physically preach to people. You just can't do that in that position, because it's an abuse of your authority, essentially, okay? But what you can do is something which is clearly mentioned in the Quran as being one of the instructions for us, which is to be shuhada ala nas, to be the witnesses to mankind. Okay, so that means that your deen and your faith manifests in your life. Yeah. Now, of course, with your work colleagues, that's different, because it's more of a kind of, you know, comparable relationship, and you talk quite freely about all sorts of things. So that's a different matter. I'm just talking about the kind of, you know, professional patient relationship where you can't do this. Okay, but shahada is more compelling than any words. We know that. Okay, and that's why Allah talks about the importance of this. You know, da'wah is mentioned once or twice. Shahada is mentioned many, many times. Okay, I hope that's, you know, answers that question.
The second question is, how can we balance the time? I usually show empathy, but on clinics, time can be limited.
Yeah. I know. You know, you know, at least if you can feel it in your heart. I always say to my work colleagues that the measure of a good GP is if they're running behind. So you know, I'm not the best example of timekeeping when it comes to my clinics. I just have this principle: I just give people as much time as they need, and that's it. But I know the whole, not everyone can function like that, really. Maybe I have a luxury, alhamdulillah. Not only am I blessed in being in this profession, but also that I can kind of take as much time as is needed, and I can still get away with it. Don't get to see my children quite as much, maybe, but still I can get away with it. I know it's difficult. I can't answer that very easily. At least, you know, the moment you see someone, even if your eyes show that rahmah, you know, even if your eyes show that compassion and that empathy, that's something, isn't it? Even if you just ask them one or two questions about their life, and then move on. There's books written about consultation skills. So there are ways of, you know, making it slightly more efficient, but you have to start obviously open. You have to start by just stop, give space, listen, find out what their life is like. Even if you don't give it too much time, but But you must do that. You must start with that. Then after that, you can start getting with closed questions. You know, if you summarize, then that helps to speed things up. So, you know, that tells them, reassures the patient that yes, you have heard, you do understand, you do appreciate, you know, you feel it, and you respect the life that you know, the suffering they're going through, and then you can start to sort of maybe take control of the consultation. So this is a whole, you know, there's a whole art to it, but I'm not the best at that either, to be honest.
The final question in the last 3 minutes, it's in the chat actually, you can probably read it. If you're humble, helpful and caring, how do you stop yourself from being treated like a doormat by others who aren't?
Yes. Okay, good questions. These are all great questions, alhamdulillah. Well, I think, you know, there's no doubt that you do have to assert to yourself at times, you know, and you have to demonstrate your value to a team or an organization. You know, you can't be too humble when there's a job interview, for instance, as well. You know, so sometimes you do have to play the game, but and also, I think, you know, it depends. You've just got to look at the context. You know, if you don't obviously you don't want to let yourself get abused, and that's no good either. It's not good for your mental health. But the thing is also, bear in mind that if you're being abused by somebody and taken advantage of, so are probably other people as well, and that's perhaps more of a motivation for you to call this out and to check it. Okay, I think, you know, the world is changing, and hopefully, you know, the kind of environments and the images that you had before, maybe of very dictatorial type team leaders, consultants, are becoming less common now. I don't know though, because, you know, that's your world. But you know, where it is there, then I think you just have to find polite ways of calling this out, because it you know, it's not acceptable. The point is that, you know, you want to show everyone else respect, but you have to be shown respect as well. And, you know, if you're not, just bear in mind other people aren't being shown respect either, probably, by that person. And by advising them, and it's all about the hikmah of how you do it, you're also helping them as well, because, you know, if they're if they're abusing you, they're probably pretty not seen as very nice people. And it's not nice to go through life being disliked by everyone.
Thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for now. Just a reminder, this is a series of talks, so we will be having, I think, a couple more from Dr. Rizwan. I think we're looking at the next one being How Islamic is the West, exploring the 4 phases of Islam's influence on our society. And then prophetic medicine. What is prophetic medicine, and is it relevant today for the future, inshallah? But yeah, thank you so much, Uncle Rizwan. I think some of the things that were said today link really nicely to our badge month, which is coming up, which some of you may have heard about, our Believe and Do Good, coming up this February. We have so much going on this month, and a lot for you all to get involved in if you would like. There's homeless feeds, there's sign language workshops, but there's especially our Creative Acts of Good event, where we give you the opportunity to visit and talk to some lonely patients in hospital. And I think this is the perfect example of living by the spiritual code as a healthcare professional, or even if you're not, but just spreading goodness and practicing marhama, like Uncle Rizwan spoke about. So yeah, I think that's everything. Uncle Rizwan, will you send me the notes for that?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Sure.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Jazakallah for coming. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. Assalamu alaikum, everyone.